Okay. This week's parsha is Shoftim, and it begins Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sharecha. Judges, and we could call them policemen or enforcers of the law, you shall set up in all of your gates. And this is always a parsha comes near Rosh Chodesh Elul, telling us that the big judgment is coming, but really we should set up judges on ourselves. That's on a personal level. Of course, this mitzvah is a mitzvah to set up courts of law and to have judges, to have enforcers of the law, and set up a righteous society where the law works. But on a personal level, it's the mitzvah is that we should enter into a month of introspection and, in a sense, judging ourselves, not judging other people, but judging ourselves and making the proper rectifications, tikkunim that we need to do. This parsha, like every parsha, has many subjects. So I'm going to concentrate on one verse. And the verse comes at the end of a passage. We're in the 18th chapter. And it's from verse 9 through 14. And here, the Torah warns the Jewish people not to get involved with all kinds of magical practices, consulting the dead, someone who gives omens, a sorcerer, an animal charmer, all kinds of different attempts to manipulate nature or to contact the dead, or to try to figure out the future through different kinds of magical practices. And towards the end of it, in the verse 13, it says, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. You should be wholehearted, sincere, complete with Hashem, your God. That's what the verse says. In other words, after this whole list of what other nations, the practices of other nations, especially, we're talking about 3,000 years ago, all kinds of magical kind of ways to figure out the future. So the Torah says you should be wholehearted with Hashem. So I'm going to read the Rashi. It's a classic Rashi. And it's interesting because there are 5 words in this verse. And he gives like 5 different segments of his commentary. So he says like this, Hitalech imo b'tmimut. You should walk with him with wholeheartedness, with sincerity, be completely walking with Hashem. V'titzapelo, and you shall anticipate being with Hashem. In other words, not to depend on other people to try to tell you what your future is going to be. But you should anticipate that if you're close enough to God, then God will, in a sense, send a message or an answer to your prayers. V'lo tachor achar atidot, and you shouldn't go out of your way to figure out the future, again, by using all these kinds of different practices. Ela kol ma sheyavo alecha kabel b'tmimut. Rather, everything that comes to you, you shall accept with wholeheartedness and sincerity. Va'az tiyeh imo, and if you do so, then you will be with him, v'chelko, and his portion. So this is a classic Rashi. In short, what he's saying is, instead of trying to depend on a Ouija board or going to some occult mystic who will, read your tea leaves or all kinds of different things. Instead, you should just have, basically what he's saying, just have trust in God. And the more that we are in what's called tmimut, the more wholehearted we are, and the more we accept things as they come to us instead of trying to manipulate nature, then we will be with Hashem and be in his portion. So this, of course, is connected to this idea that the divine soul is an actual part of God above. So the more that we connect with Hashem, the more we connect to our chelek, our portion with Hashem. So that's the verse that we want to work with tonight. And according to the Baal HaTurim, as you might know, there are certain letters in the Torah that are big, and there's certain letters in the Torah that are small. There are not that many of them, but there's also a tradition that even though a letter might not be written in the Torah as big, there's still a tradition that it's like a big letter. So the Baal HaTurim points out that the first letter of this verse, tamim, the tav, is a big letter. Again, it does not appear in the Torah as a big letter, but by tradition, it's as if it's a big letter. And the Baal HaTurim gives a reason, and he says that tav is the last letter, and so therefore, if we follow the Torah from Aleph ad Tav, then we will be in the state of Tmimut. Because one of the things that Rashi said is just that we should accept those things that come to us. So it's the same thing, the way we accept doing mitzvot. Some mitzvot we understand, some mitzvot we don't really understand the deeper meanings of it, but we do it anyways. That's a state of tmimut, that we trust that the mitzvot that Hashem has given us is for our good, and therefore, with a whole heart, I do them, even if I don't understand the full meaning or ramifications of this. That's what we said at Har Sinai, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear. In other words, hear means to understand. So instead of waiting until we completely understand a mitzvah and then say, okay, then I'll do it, we do the mitzvot, and hopefully we will come to understand. And through learning, for sure, there are so many unbelievable commentaries to help us understand. So it's interesting because the Baal HaTurim says this letter is like a big tav, meaning if you follow the Torah from Aleph ad Tav, then you'll be in the state of Tmimut. So the first verse of the 119th Psalm, the 119th Psalm is the longest of all the Psalms, 176 verses, and it's made up of, it's an acrostic of all 22 Hebrew letters, and each letter begins a verse, and there are 8 verses in each segment. So 22 times 8 equals 176. So the first one that begins the Aleph is Ashrei Tamimi Tamimei Derech HaHolchim B'Torat Hashem. Happy or joyful are those that walk in a sincere way, walking in the Torah of Hashem. And here it begins with an Aleph. So this is a little bit what the Baal HaTurim is saying. We have the word Tamimei Derech, the same word Tamim, in this first verse that begins with an Aleph. But we see that this idea of Tamimut appears in many, many different verses. Another one is in the 19th Psalm, which we say every Shabbat morning, where it says, Torat Hashem Tamima, Meshivat Nefesh. The Torah of Hashem, here it's translated as whole, because we're talking about God. The Torah of Hashem is whole. It returns the soul, meaning it brings life to the soul. It awakens the soul. It returns the soul to its source. By learning Torah, our Shoresh Neshama, the root of our soul, connects to the Torah, which is from Hashem. So we connect to Hashem through the Torah, and the secret here is b'tmimut, that we're not, when we're not learning with all kinds of agendas. We're not learning in order to be rich or to be powerful. We're learning the Torah because it's meshivat nefesh. It returns life to our soul. And there's another one in Proverbs, in the 10th chapter, the 9th verse of Proverbs, reads, Holech betom yelech betach. The one that walks in sincerity, in wholeheartedness, in their whole being, they walk with confidence. They will have a sense of self-security. So that's also another beautiful verse that has Tamimut in it. But the first one, the first person who is described as being Tamim is Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu, when the Torah is describing, Esav is considered a man of the field, and Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. Yaakov was again, sincere, some say innocent, wholehearted, sitting in the tents. And according to tradition, what tents are these? These were the yeshivot of Shem and Ever, that Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov all learned in, we're calling it a yeshiva. It was a school that was begun by the son of Noach and his son, Ever. And so that's the sitting in the tents. So if we go back to Torah Hashem Tamima, the Torah of Hashem is whole. So in a sense, we have like a chicken and egg kind of situation where in order to really learn the Torah, it has to be with Tamimut. Because again, if we're learning it for some kind of ulterior motive, we're learning it because we want to be the top in the class, or we want to be recognized by the rabbi more than anyone else, or all kinds of different ulterior motives. So the Torah we're learning is not going to have the same wholeness to it. So in a sense, we need to be in a state of tamimut in order to learn the Torah. But at the same time, one of the great gifts of the Torah is that it helps us to have tamimut. So it's like a chicken and egg, like what comes first? Now, obviously, if a person doesn't have a complete state of tamimut, hopefully by learning Torah, that midah, that attribute will be strengthened. So Rav Ginsburg explains that each of the sfirot has an inner dynamic, an inner force to it. And so the inner dynamic of the sphere of Hod is tamimut. And that's how important tamimut is, because it's very associated with one of the sfirot, with Hod. Hod means to thank, to praise, to acknowledge, and to confess. Each of these words in Hebrew are connected. Tov lahodot l'Hashem. It's good to give thanks to Hashem. Tov lahodot. And what's really important here is that the word Jew comes from the tribe Yehuda, because after the 10 tribes were taken into captivity, the two remaining tribes, other than the Levim and the Kohanim, were Yehuda and Binyamin. And Yehuda was by far the larger tribe. And so actually the first time the word Yehudi is mentioned is in the Megillah, that Mordechai is called Ish Yehudi. That's the first time it's mentioned. So this is approximately after the destruction of the first temple. So it's let's say it's approximately 500 before the Common Era, BCE. But that's the first time that someone is called a Yehudi, a Jew, because in Bavel, the majority of people there were from the tribe of Yehuda. Of course, there were some from Binyamin, and there were Kohanim and Levim, and a little bit from the other tribes also that had been in the southern kingdom. So the word Jew, Yehuda, the root of Yehuda is Hod. So when we talk about tamimut, when we talk about wholeheartedness, this is almost a defining feature of the concept of Yehudi, especially the idea of giving thanks, to acknowledging, to praising. Because if someone is an automatic ego pilot, so it's not like so natural to be thanking and to be praising, acknowledging, because the ego is like the center of one's world. So this idea of tamimut, that our connection with Hashem is tamim, it's sincere. It's a simple and straight, no frills connection. So that's kind of at the root of being a Yehudi. And so that's why we say 100 blessings a day. And a blessing is a thank you. Toby just wrote genuine. That's also a very good way. Sincere, genuine. I'll come up with another word. So if we use innocent, it has too much baggage with it. Kind of like in the Haggadah, authentic, perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. Authenticity. authentic. What did you say before? Genuine, authentic, genuine, wholehearted, sincere, all of these words. And this is the ikar of serving Hashem, is to be in this very simple. This is one of the reasons that the Baal Shem Tov loved what people call the simple Jew. They didn't have all this complexity and philosophical, existential musings and questions and complexity. Just their connection with Hashem was just simple. And simple here is a positive way of saying it. Okay, now with the time that we have left, there's a beautiful teaching from Reb Zusha. Reb Zusha was the brother of Rabbi Elimelech. They were both students of the Maggid of Mezrich. And Reb Zusha, many stories about him, but he came up with an acronym for tshuva. Tshuva has 5 letters: Tav, Shin, Vav, Bet, Hey. Those are the letters of tshuva. Again, Tav, Shin, Vav, Bet, Hey. So he picked 5 verses that began with these 5 letters as a condensed meditation, in a sense, of what is needed to do tshuva. What is the attitude? What is the headspace of doing tshuva? And I'm mentioning this because the first one is our verse that we've been learning tonight. He says the tav of teshuva is tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. So he says like that's like the first step of tshuva, is in a sense to like part all of the curtains, all of the klipot, all of the shells, the coverings between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is to just make it a simple, like Yisrael. If you change the sin of Yisrael to a shin, it's Yeshar Kel, straight to God. That's the idea, that it's a straight connection. So it's many jokes about this, but it's like a local call. It's not like a long distance call, it's a local call. So that's the tav of tshuva, is the verse that we've been learning tonight. And now we'll go through the others fairly quickly. So the shin, so he picked Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, which means I place God in front of me at all times. Meaning, part of the tshuva process is the awareness that God is present in our life. God knows our thoughts, knows our speech, knows our actions, knows our heart. In a sense, there's no hiding from God. So in other words, I put God before me, the awareness that God is before me, is watching, is listening, and cares. Not just that he's a policeman watching us, but that God cares about us. Now, this word shaviti, which is here is translated as I place, also is the same root as shaveh, which means equal. So the way that Chassidut explains this is not just I place God before me, but I accept with equanimity everything that happens to me and around me. I make it shaveh. In other words, listen, we all have emotions. We all have our ups. We have our downs. We have our happy moments. We have our sad moments. That's understood. But the idea is not to be on a constant roller coaster that gets very dizzying. And many people every day are on a roller coaster. 1 minute, it's like everything is just fine. And the next minute, everything is falling apart. And 1 minute, everything is good. The next minute, I'm stressed. And it's like a roller coaster. So the idea is, Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I try to see that God is involved in all of this, and I do my best. We're human beings, but we do our best not to get, call it manic depressive. We try to keep somewhat of an even keel here. The next one is the Vav of Teshuvah. Again, Tav, Shin, now we're on the Vav, and that's V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The end of the pasuk is Ani Hashem. And everyone asks, why does it have to say Ani Hashem? It says it so many times in the Torah. What's the connection with loving your neighbor as yourself? I am Hashem. And one of the explanations is that this is very, very connected. There's this idea that just between people, there's this idea of soulmates. There's an idea that certain verses in the Torah have, as it were, a soulmate. So the soulmate of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha is V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, that you shall love God. Here it's saying you should love your neighbor. And the other one, which starts the exact same way, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. So here we see that the way to love God is through loving other people. That's the explanation in Chassidut, why the verse, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, I am God. Because to love God means that you love other people as well. Now we have the bet of Teshuvah, and that is B'chol Derachecha De'ehu. Actually, I'm going to go back quickly for anyone who wants to do their homework afterwards. So, Tamim Tiyeh Hashem Elokecha, the first one about being wholehearted with Hashem, is in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 13. Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, I place God before me at all times, is in Tehillim, Psalms, the 16th Tehillim, the 8th verse. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That is in Leviticus, Vayikra, the 19th chapter, the 18th verse. And now we're on B'chol Derachecha De'ehu. In all of your ways, know him. This is in Mishlei, Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, the 6th verse. And this is one of the most important teachings from the Baal Shem Tov that was handed down through all of the Hasidic Rebbes, was that one can know God not just through learning Torah and not just through praying, but even our mundane activities. Everything that we do, this is connected to putting Hashem before me at all times. That everything that I do can have a lesson, can bring me close to God. Eating can become holy. Working can lift up many, many holy sparks. Being in nature is a wonderful way to connect to God. Listening to music, taking care of our children, doing someone a favor, whatever it is, cleaning our house for Shabbos, all of our activities, B'chol Derachecha De'ehu, in all of your ways, know him. You can know God through all kinds of different ways. And the last verse, it's actually the second letter, because it begins with a vav, which means and that is Hatzne lechet im Elokecha. You should walk modestly with your God. This is in the prophet Micha, the 6th chapter, the 8th verse. So this last one also is this idea of modesty. Here it includes clothes, dressing modestly, but it's much more than that. It's not being arrogant, not being prideful, not having chutzpah, being modest, especially in one's success, or if one is wealthy. There's nothing wrong with wealth, but the way some people throw it around and make sure everyone knows how wealthy they are and how they use it to manipulate situations and people. The idea is to walk modestly with Hashem. So here, Reb Zusha gave us 5 beautiful ideas, and he connected them to the word teshuvah. And hopefully, those who took notes or those who will review this video can really contemplate this and meditate it through the month of Elul. It's Rosh Chodesh today, and a month from tomorrow night is Rosh Hashanah. So I want to end with a blessing for everyone, that it's a Shana Tova U'Metuka, a sweet year, and all of us use the month of Elul to do our best to improve ourselves, to look deeply, and to move forward. And it should be a year of blessing for ourselves, our families, all of Israel, and the whole world.